Hello, this is Cinema 4D Quick Tips, and today we will show you how to create a digital timer that is counting up and down using Xpresso. First, create a text object by clicking and holding on the text spline icon and choosing text from the pop-up palette. Then create a null object by clicking on the null logo and name it Counter Controller. Go down to the attributes of the counter controller, click on User Data, and select Add User Data from the drop-down menu. The Manage User Data window has opened. Here, change the data type from float to integer, since we only need the whole numbers without decimals. Then change the interface from integer to integer slider to create a slider that we will animate later. Leave the limit min at 0 and change the limit max from 100 to 5, since we will count from 0 to 5 and then from 5 to 0. Finally, hit OK button. If you select the counter controller object, you will see that it has a new tab, User Data, which contains the integer slider we created. Now right-click on the counter controller object, go to the Programming text, and click on the Xpresso. The Xpresso tag has appeared to the right of the counter controller in the Object Manager, and the Xpresso editor window has opened. Drag and drop the counter controller from the Object Manager to the Xpresso editor. Do the same with the text object. In the Xpresso editor, make the counter controller and text nodes bigger. Click on the Outputs menu, red square, of the counter node, select User Data, and choose Data. Then click on the Inputs menu, blue square, of the text node, select Object Properties, and choose Text Spline. Finally, connect the data output port of the counter controller node to the text spline input port of the text node. Now the integer slider of the counter controller object controls the text spline property of the text object. Close the Xpresso editor, select the counter controller in the Object Manager, and go to the User Data tab. Here, if you move the integer slider, the text will change accordingly. Let's animate the integer slider. For this, extend the timeline to 180 frames. It is 6 seconds from 0 to 5 in the 30 frames per second project. Set the time slider to frame 0. Drag the integer slider to the left and click on the little icon to the left of the data to create the first keyframe of the animation. Then move the time slider to frame 150. It is the starting frame of the last 5th second. Drag the integer slider to the right and click on the icon to the left of the data again to create the second keyframe. To keep the seconds counting evenly, open the timeline dope sheet by clicking on the appropriate logo. Select Counter Controller and click on the Linear. Close the timeline dope sheet and click on the Play Forwards button. The counting from 0 to 5 goes evenly. Stop the animation. Now let's make the timer count down from 5 to 0. Delete previously created animation keyframes by opening the timeline dope sheet, selecting Counter Controller, and pressing Delete on the keyboard. Then close the timeline dope sheet. Select the counter controller in the Object Manager and go to the User Data tab, where the integer slider is located. To create the first keyframe, move the timeline to frame 30 so that the number 5 is visible for 30 frames or 1 second. Drag the integer slider to the right and click on the icon to the left of the data. To create the second keyframe, move the timeline to frame 180, drag the integer slider to the left, and click on the icon to the left of the data again. To keep the seconds counting evenly, open the timeline dope sheet, select Counter Controller, and click on the linear. Close the timeline dope sheet and click on the Play Forwards button. The counting from 5 to 0 goes evenly. Stop the animation. Now let's make the air balloon take off after the countdown ends. Open the Asset Browser by clicking on the Asset Browser logo. Search for balloon and drag and drop the hot air balloon into the viewport. Close the Asset Browser, click on the Scale logo, make the balloon smaller, click on the Move logo, and drag the balloon a little against the Z-axis. Click on the hot air balloon in the Object Manager, extend the timeline to 300 frames, move the time slider to frame 150, and click on the Record Active Objects logo to create the first keyframe of the balloon animation. Then move the time slider to frame 300, go to the Coordinates tab of the hot air balloon object. Increase the value of the P.Y property so that the air balloon moves up out of viewport, and click on the diamond to the left of the P.Y property to create the second keyframe. Finally, go to the start of the timeline and press Play Forwards button. Launch. Thank you for your attention, subscribe to the channel and put your finger up.